And I'm always of the mindset of like, let's show it to the most critical people first, like the people who are diehard book fans, because then you want to make sure that you're servicing the people who are most passionate about it. And Isabella at this point was still working at a restaurant in Brooklyn. Colleen called her and she was like, you gotta come to the screening. She's like, I can't get my shift covered. She's like, get on a plane, come now. And so she like left from the restaurant with like I don't know.
I didn't even make it to the restaurant.
The Taylor Swift and Blake Lively text messages are finally here, and they are so bad. And we haven't even gotten everything yet. It appears Taylor Swift was a lot more involved than she initially claimed, including the New York Times article.
Welcome back to the CelebRush channel, where the loudest celebrity moves always hit first. Make sure you subscribe right now and drop a comment below, because this story is already heating up and the details are too wild to ignore. The great unsealing has officially landed on Blake Lively's side, and things escalated fast. Her exhibits are now out in the open, being used to tear through the case piece by piece and push back hard against the memorandum that's trying to shut everything down through summary judgment. This is where it turns chaotic. Blake didn't just hand over a light stack of paperwork. She dropped nearly 300 documents, and they've now been unsealed for the public to see. Many expected heavy blackouts all over the pages, but that didn't happen at all. The only things hidden are phone numbers and, in some cases, names. That's it, nothing more. And before anyone jumps into the comments asking, yes, Taylor Swift is mentioned, yes, Ryan Reynolds also shows up in the documents, and yes, there are text messages that paint a very unfiltered picture behind the scenes. According to the filings, Blake exchanged messages with several people, including Colleen Hoover, Jenny Slate, and Taylor Swift, and some of those texts raise eyebrows fast. There are also messages involving actor Brandon Sklar that critics say crossed professional boundaries, all now part of the public record and sparking non-stop chatter online. And the tone alone had people raising eyebrows instantly. Then there's the PGA letter, which honestly reads less like a serious legal document and more like straight-up fan fiction. Blake reportedly kept pushing hard behind the scenes to get credit attached to it, pressing the issue repeatedly and making it clear she wanted her name tied to the narrative. It gets messier fast. She allegedly even bragged in messages about a gift she gave to Isabella Ferre, emphasizing that it wasn't just about generosity, but about recognition. That detail didn't sit right with a lot of people, especially once the filings laid everything out in black and white. What really jumps out is the pattern here. Throughout this whole process, Blake and Ryan were allegedly floating promises of future opportunities, credits, and possible jobs to people connected to the film, seemingly to lock in loyalty and keep support tight. That alone has set off non-stop chatter online, but this is where things stop making sense. According to the filings, Blake and Justin reportedly got along just fine even after she later claimed there were serious issues between them. At the same time, messages show her allegedly speaking negatively about him to others while texting Justin directly, telling him how much she appreciated and cared about him. That flip-flop energy is wild, and there's still one more detail buried deep in the documents that people are only starting to notice now. This part really had people doing a double take. In an official statement of undisputed facts, it's noted that Blake commented on actors' physical appearances connected to the project, both before and after her demands came into play. One exchange from March 29th mentions her meeting an actor. Then later, while discussing marketing in May 2024, Sony allegedly said he was pretty, which only added more side-eye to the situation. Things escalated quickly after that. In another message, Blake reportedly texted an adult younger male cast member and made a joke that instantly rubbed people the wrong way. She said she was becoming pimp adjacent and told him to put on a short little skirt and get on the corner, a line that clearly didn't land how it may have been intended. Yes, that exact wording is now sitting in black and white for everyone to read, and it's already stirring serious backlash. The quote, "I'm becoming pimp adjacent, put on a short little skirt and get on the corner," has been circulating non-stop, with critics calling it inappropriate and awkward at best. Blake's side, however, insists it was just a joke. According to the undisputed facts, the message was sent to S. Skinner, described as a friend and co-worker who was 33 years old at the time. The filing stresses that the comment was not about his physical appearance and was meant as humor while discussing possible press opportunities, not anything beyond that. But let's pause for a second and really think about this. Imagine if the roles were reversed. If Justin had said something like that to Blake, even as a joke, the internet would have gone into full meltdown mode instantly. That reaction would have been unavoidable, especially since Blake reportedly took serious offense when Justin once commented on her costume and called it sexy or hot, something she clearly didn't appreciate at all. That double standard is loud, and people noticed it right away. And it doesn't stop there. Blake and Jenny Slate, another actor on the film, were also pulled into controversy over comments made about another female celebrity's appearance while on set, and those messages didn't sit quietly either. In one undisputed text exchange, Blake recalled an incident while writing to Slate, saying, "You said you used to stare at a celebrity's midsection for hours before you finished, and said what an athlete she was and how remarkable she seemed as a young girl." That quote alone had people doing a double take. She then added that Baldoni jumped in saying, "Same," giggled, and then went silent when everyone turned to look at him. That moment raised eyebrows across the board and quickly became a talking point in the filings. And yes, if you're wondering whether Taylor Swift appears here, she absolutely does. And more than once. On April 12, 2023, Blake reached out to her longtime friend, the world-famous musician, asking for help, and in those messages she referred to Baldoni as the director of my movie and mocked him as a clown who thinks he's a writer now, wording that has since sparked even more backlash and debate. She then asked Swift to endorse a revised script without even reading it, and this is where things really start slipping sideways.
And didn't want her to feel pressured, but hoped she would. Taylor eventually agreed, texting Blake, "I'll do anything for you." The two later met with Baldoni at Blake's apartment, where Taylor endorsed the revised draft. Afterward, Blake followed up with another message to Taylor, sealing that moment into the record. "You were so epically heroic today. I recapped every moment to Ryan." That's how Blake followed up in a private message, and the tone only gets messier from there. She went on to joke about moments she made up, talked about lenses, and even referenced herself as his doll, laughing about how the situation played out. The message makes it pretty clear they thought the whole thing was funny and felt like they had outplayed him. What stands out is that Blake is openly acknowledging in writing that parts of the story told in that meeting weren't exactly real, and that they were laughing afterward about how easily it worked. That alone has people raising eyebrows all over.
Taylor had previously said she felt like she walked into an ambush and didn't fully understand what was happening at the time, which already raised red flags. Blake disputes that version, claiming she sent Taylor the script while on her way to the apartment, with Justin still there, and told her she didn't have to read it if she didn't want to and shouldn't feel pressured, but still hoped she would support it anyway. That detail alone has people split. Eventually, Taylor agreed. In a message to Blake, she wrote, "I'll do anything for you," a line that immediately became one of the most talked about quotes in the filings. Not long after, the two met with Baldoni at Blake's apartment, where Taylor openly endorsed the revised draft. After that meeting, Blake followed up with another private message that locked the moment into the record. She wrote, "You were so epically heroic. Today, I recapped every moment to Ryan." That message alone sent shockwaves through online discussions, but it didn't stop there. The tone of the conversation only got messier from that point on. Blake went on to joke about moments she admitted she made up, talked about camera lenses, and even referred to herself as his doll, laughing about how everything unfolded. The overall message makes it pretty clear that they found the situation funny and felt like they had completely outplayed him.
Taylor Swift acknowledging that she's Blake Lively's dragon and that Blake Lively is Khaleesi, yes. These are text messages just dropped in the lawsuit, the ongoing lawsuit for It Ends With Us, Let's Go. Taylor Swift saying, "Wow, I love how they used this song. Welcome to Hollywood, Justin." Yeah, that's Taylor Swift saying that. And then Blake Lively goes, "I'm not okay. I can't breathe. I'm obsessed with you. I have never felt more like Khaleesi. I have dragons, except my dragons are bred with Cersei herself."
And that realization has become one of the most controversial takeaways from the newly unsealed documents. What really stands out here is that Blake is openly acknowledging in writing that parts of the story told during that meeting weren't exactly real, and that everyone involved was laughing afterward about how easily it worked. That detail alone has people raising eyebrows everywhere because it shifts the entire tone of what was supposed to be a serious situation. Now here's where the record starts getting confusing fast. Blake disputes the idea that Swift officially agreed to do her bidding or formally endorsed the revised draft, saying that claim isn't backed by solid evidence. But that denial immediately clashes with what happens next in the timeline. Just days later, on April 14th, Baldoni texted Blake saying he would have liked the rewrite with or without Ryan or Taylor involved. In response, Blake allegedly explained that she was trying to protect herself, comparing the situation to a fantasy-style setup where Reynolds and Swift were her dragons, a metaphor that instantly grabbed attention. That comparison did not go unnoticed at all, and it quickly became one of the most talked-about lines in the filings. Critics say it reveals how she viewed her influence and leverage in the situation. She then pushed back again, writing that everyone benefits from her connections to Reynolds and Swift, and adding, "And you will too." That closing line hit hard and left a lot of people questioning how power, access, and influence were really being used behind the scenes. That line alone says a lot, and when it comes to Taylor's claim that she was ambushed at the penthouse, the details don't fully add up. This wasn't a quick hello or a casual pop-in like some tried to frame it. Her own PR reportedly attempted to downplay the moment, saying she just stopped by to say hi, but the messages paint a much more involved picture. According to the texts, the interaction went deeper than what was publicly suggested, and that gap has people questioning what really happened behind those doors. And then things take a heavier turn. Baldoni raised concerns about how deeply personal experiences were discussed, specifically around situations involving lack of consent. He reportedly objected to how those topics were framed, feeling the conversation crossed a serious line and shouldn't have been handled that way. In later messages, Blake allegedly compared his objections to an article where he had previously spoken publicly about being a victim himself. She disputes that interpretation, but she does admit that she shared the article with Swift, which only adds another layer to the situation. What complicates everything even more is later testimony suggesting Baldoni disclosed deeply personal experiences during an April 2023 car ride. That detail has made people pause because it raises questions about context, boundaries, and how private conversations were later referenced in writing. Accounts describe him talking about situations where boundaries weren't respected on both sides, and that directly clashes with statements from Blake's security team. That contradiction is now sitting right at the center of this entire dispute, and it's one of the biggest pressure points in the filings. Whether that claim actually holds up is still up in the air, but this next part connects straight to the trailer situation involving Taylor Swift, and things get interesting fast. According to the filings, in the weeks that followed, Blake allegedly made extensive edits to the film's trailer and poster. Blake pushes back hard on that claim, calling it argumentative and saying it isn't backed by solid evidence at all. The documents point to text messages where Blake discusses trailer edits with Greenstein and, in a separate exchange, asks Taylor Swift to watch the trailer. That alone raised eyebrows, especially given everything else happening behind the scenes. But here's the catch, and it matters. None of those messages actually prove that Blake personally edited the trailer or directly ordered major changes to the trailer or poster. There's no clear instruction, no final call, no smoking gun in those texts. Still, while she was actively pushing for creative control and advocating for her preferred cut of the film, the filings suggest she was telling a very different story behind closed doors, and that contrast has become another major talking point in this unfolding saga. In messages sent to her Hollywood circle, Blake did not hold back at all. She told several famous friends that she rewrote the script and personally directed every actor herself. And yes, the celebrity list attached to those claims is wild. According to the messages, she made these statements to people like Matt Damon, Luciana Damon, and Ben Affleck. In those same conversations, she openly criticized Baldoni, even describing him to Ben Affleck as a chaotic clown, wording that immediately turned heads once it became public. One message to Ben Affleck goes even further. In it, Blake straight up claimed she rewrote and restructured the entire script and ultimately directed the movie herself, blaming what she described as a chaotic director, actor, producer, financier, and studio head, all rolled into one. That doesn't exactly read like someone describing mistreatment in a workplace. Instead, it comes off more like personal frustration mixed with a power struggle over creative control. And here's the key part that matters most. Blake does not dispute sending any of those messages. She fully acknowledges that she said those things, with no denial or walk back at all. She also reportedly urged Colleen Hoover and other A-list friends, including Bradley Cooper and Taylor Swift, to support her version of the film over Baldoni's, adding yet another layer to the influence battle playing out behind the scenes. And on April 26, 2024, messages between Blake and Taylor pull the curtain back even further. The two were openly discussing a plan to use Taylor's song in the trailer, and Taylor straight up texted that if Justin were being strategic, he would actually say no to her music because it would give Blake more control over the film. That message alone raised eyebrows fast. Blake didn't hesitate to agree. She replied, "You are so right. He should have run from your music." That one line instantly became one of the most quoted exchanges in the filings because of how blunt and calculated it sounded. That exchange says a lot about how strategic this situation had become behind the scenes. What really stands out is how the conversation frames his so-called strategy as his only chance at holding on to any control at all. The messages read like two people calmly breaking down how Blake could secure the trailer her way, while quietly laughing at the fact that he didn't play his cards right. The irony here is impossible to miss. Justin wanted to use Taylor Swift's music, but Blake was the one pushing Taylor's songs from the very beginning. That flips the narrative in a major way. Taylor even directly told Blake that their friendship gave Blake more power over the film because Taylor was her ally. That detail alone turns the public story upside down and directly contradicts what Taylor has said publicly, which, honestly, explains why so many people are now rethinking everything they thought they knew about this situation. This likely explains why Taylor hasn't stepped out to publicly defend Blake or deny anything on her behalf. Her silence has always been loud, and now it's starting to make a lot more sense as these filings come together. Then the story takes another unexpected turn when the Vanz situation enters the picture, and once again, Taylor's name somehow ends up connected according to the filings. Around August 2024, Stephanie Jones, a former publicist, and Blake allegedly connected through a mutual acquaintance to share information Jones claimed she had found on Abel's personal phone. This detail comes directly from Blake's deposition, parts of which have surfaced, though not in full yet. What really stands out is that Taylor appears in these communications too. In one message, Taylor allegedly told Blake that this PR chick wanted to get information to her, which immediately raised questions. It's undisputed that in August 2024, Blake was approached by Ashley Nan, who claimed that Jones had access to a phone containing what she described as some of the most disturbing messages she had seen in her entire career. Blake was reportedly told that she deserved to see what had allegedly been done to her. Now here's where things get complicated fast. Blake is the president and a 50% owner, alongside Ryan Reynolds, of a company called Vanz. According to the filings, the company reportedly has no external operations and no other owners or officers. The documents also allege that personal expenses were paid through the company, and that detail alone has added another layer of scrutiny to everything unfolding around this situation. So how did Taylor already know that Stephanie Jones wanted to pass information to Blake? That question alone has people raising eyebrows everywhere because the timing doesn't sit right at all. The filing suggests that Jones may have been reviewing that phone while still under active contractual obligations, including a non-disclosure agreement. Blake disputes any wrongdoing here, but the timeline quickly gets messy, especially around September 27, 2024. On that date, Vanz, allegedly acting under Blake's direction, filed a lawsuit in New York State Court. The suit claimed that 10 unidentified defendants breached contracts in a coordinated effort to damage Vanz's reputation. And while it's undisputed that the lawsuit was filed, the real question is why it was done this way. The defendants were listed as unknown, even though Blake personally knew everyone involved in the film. That choice alone has sparked serious questions about intent and strategy, with many wondering why everything was kept so quiet and indirect. Now this next part gets extremely technical, but it matters, so stick with me. Vanz suddenly produced a witness, a lawyer with no prior relationship to the company, who claimed that any information Vanz had about the contractor named in the complaint was somehow privileged. That move raised even more eyebrows because it added another layer of secrecy to an already complicated situation, and critics say it only deepened concerns about how information was being handled behind the scenes. That claim is heavily disputed, and the evidence being cited doesn't actually back it up at all, which is where the timing starts to look very interesting. Around October 1st, 2024, Vanz reportedly took advantage of New York rules that allow discovery to happen before defendants are even formally named. Since no defendants had been identified yet, no one could step in to challenge the process during that window, and that detail matters. Using that opening, Vanz served a subpoena on Jones' works, demanding documents tied to alleged misconduct or retaliation connected to the film, along with marketing, publicity, and PR materials. That request alone raised eyebrows because Vanz wasn't even a party to the film in the first place. And it gets stranger fast. The original complaint never mentioned the movie at all. It never mentioned Jones' works either, and Vanz had no contract with them whatsoever. On top of that, there were no prior communications between Vanz and Jones' works before the subpoena was served, and all of that is undisputed. Those facts have left people seriously questioning how this unfolded so precisely. What really stands out is how Blake suddenly seemed to be connected to the right people at exactly the right time, with every move lining up almost too perfectly as the situation escalated. Once again, Taylor Swift somehow shows up in the background of this situation, and the timing is hard to ignore. According to the filings, Taylor allegedly knew that Stephanie Jones was preparing to release a wave of damaging information, and somehow Vanz knew exactly where to look and what to ask for. That kind of precision doesn't feel random at all, and it's another reason why Taylor's public silence has been so noticeable. It's also alleged that Taylor sent Blake a message ahead of a major New York Times article and helped her prepare for what was coming. That detail alone adds a whole new layer to this already tangled situation and raises fresh questions about coordination behind the scenes. Then comes the most explosive part yet. On December 4th and 5th, Blake and Taylor allegedly discussed the upcoming article privately. In one quoted message that's now part of the filings, Taylor wrote, "I think this guy knows something is coming because he's gotten out his tiny violin." That wording is now officially in the record, and yes, it shocked a lot of people once it surfaced. Blake disputes that the two discussed the article during those specific dates, pushing back on the interpretation of the timeline. However, what is not disputed is that the quoted message appears exactly as written in the cited source. That distinction matters, and it's why critics are now asking a serious question about how much was known and when, as all of this was unfolding behind closed doors. Does that text sound like someone who's scared or acting like a victim? Or does it sound like two people who are confident that something big is about to drop and fully aware of it? That's the question people can't stop asking. Many are saying they've never seen Taylor Swift talk about anyone like that before, and that alone has made this hit differently. Now flip the roles for a second. If Justin Baldoni had sent a message using that same kind of language, the reaction would have been instant and brutal. There would be headlines everywhere, no hesitation, no grace period at all. Instead, this message has just been sitting quietly in the filings, adding yet another contradiction to the public story that's been pushed up to this point. And reading through this in real time, it honestly hits hard. Seeing Taylor Swift's private messages and the way Blake and Taylor talk behind closed doors is genuinely shocking, especially when you compare it to the carefully crafted public image they present. The contrast is hard to ignore and even harder to explain away. And I want to be very clear here. This is not exaggeration. Reading this made my stomach drop, and that heavy feeling hasn't gone away. These are people who publicly position themselves as caring, supportive, and deeply aligned with their fans. But privately, the messages paint a very different picture. What stands out most is this: Taylor wasn't being dragged into anything against her will. The messages don't read like hesitation or pressure. They read like confidence, awareness, and control. And that detail changes how a lot of people are now looking at this entire situation. She was actively helping Blake figure out how to use her influence and connections to gain leverage, and that part is impossible to ignore. When you line that up with Taylor later saying she felt used, the words on the page don't fully support that claim. The messages suggest she wasn't passive at all. She willingly participated, backed Blake's version of events, repeated those claims, and even went along with misleading Baldoni during key meetings. She also joined in privately mocking him and allegedly helped coordinate the rollout of a New York Times article where he was spoken about in an extremely disrespectful way. That tone doesn't come across as fear, confusion, or concern. It reads more like contempt and confidence. This feels less like someone who felt threatened and more like someone who believed they were justified and untouchable at the time. And that distinction matters a lot when you're comparing public statements to what was actually said behind the scenes. It also starts to explain why Taylor's name has come up in past conversations about power dynamics and accusations of pushing people quietly behind the curtain. Those discussions didn't come out of nowhere, and these messages give them new context. And we're still not even seeing the full picture yet. The complete message history hasn't been released. More exhibits are expected to be filed, and Wayfarer still has time to submit their materials, meaning this story is far from finished, and the record may only get heavier from here. That means more context is still coming, and that part matters a lot. It looks like Blake moved fast and rushed to file first so her version of events would hit the public early. This is likely the evidence most favorable to her side, the cleanest version she could put forward, and even with that advantage, the messages are still raising serious questions. That alone says a lot. If this is the strongest framing of her case and it still doesn't fully add up, people are right to pause. And what really stands out is how Blake later brought Taylor directly into the PGA letter. She didn't mention her casually or in passing. She used Taylor's advice as leverage. Remember the whole conversation about music being power? Blake leaned into that hard, and she didn't hide it. In the letter, Blake wrote that she personally secured Taylor Swift's song for the trailer and marketing, claiming it helped create the largest debut for a film-led trailer of all time. That statement wasn't subtle at all. It was strategic. That one line ties everything together: influence, strategy, power, and control. At this point, none of this feels accidental anymore. It feels calculated, layered, and intentional. And honestly, it's wild. Taylor Swift clearly knew exactly how much power she held in this situation, and she knew her support alone could help Blake lock this film down. That's the part that keeps looping in my head because once you see it, you can't unsee it. If Taylor is a billionaire, why not just build their own project from the ground up? Why not have Ryan Reynolds, Blake, and Taylor create something completely original together? That question keeps coming up, and the answer feels pretty obvious. This book was already a massive hit. The IP was pure gold, and everyone involved knew it. They weren't starting from zero or taking a creative risk. They were stepping into something that already had built-in hype, an established audience, and a clear path to success. That's what makes this whole situation feel so calculated and intentional. And in that same PGA letter, right after name-dropping Taylor, Blake brings up another major name, Bradley Cooper. She writes about wishing she had received credit earlier so she could have applied properly from the start, stressing that precedent matters in situations like this. She then explains how Bradley reportedly gave her a pep talk and encouraged her to push for recognition, even telling her she could mention his name directly. That detail wasn't subtle, it was strategic. Blake goes on to reference his experience on Nightmare Alley, explaining that Bradley was originally hired as an actor, but ended up producing extensively behind the scenes. Just 1 month before the film's release, he received a producer credit after filing a last-minute PGA request with crew support, and it was approved. Blake makes it clear she's hoping for the same outcome here, positioning her request as standard practice rather than an exception. And that comparison ties right back into the broader theme of influence, timing, and power at play in this entire situation. Then the tone shifts hard. Blake leans fully into her identity as a woman in the industry, and she makes sure that point lands. She writes about being in the business for 20 years, about being a mother of 3 daughters, and frames her push for acknowledgement as something that matters for women right now, not just for her. She positions it as bigger than herself. She says she earned the credit 50 times over, and argues that being denied doesn't just hurt her, but hurts all women who are constantly told there are already too many female producers. She writes that women do the work anyway, fight harder to be seen, and that every fight clears the path for the next woman. That language is powerful, no question, but it's also strategic. What's hard to ignore is how closely this mirrors the Bradley Cooper example she already laid out earlier. It starts to feel like a pattern where creative control comes first and credit is demanded later. When you connect that to Taylor advising Blake to use her influence as leverage, it begins to look less like organic allyship and more like a calculated power move. The pieces start lining up in a way that feels intentional. This whole situation reads like influence stacking, name-dropping, and pushing authority until something finally snaps. The ally angle doesn't feel natural anymore. It feels tactical. And I still can't shake this part. Seeing Taylor Swift refer to a man she had barely interacted with using language like this is genuinely shocking, especially when you connect it to everything else that's now in the record. The strategy feels like it flew way too close to the sun, and once you notice it, it's impossible to ignore. She wasn't just popping in here and there. Taylor was allegedly helping Blake with Vanz, assisting behind the scenes with the New York Times, and staying involved long before there were even serious disputes on the table. That early involvement is hard to overlook. What really stands out is this part right here. Not a single one of those texts centers on harassment. Not one. The messages focus on strategy, leverage, optics, and helping Blake gain more control over the situation. That theme shows up again and again. Taylor was involved early, before things exploded publicly, and that detail keeps sticking with me. It reframes the entire timeline and makes later statements feel harder to square with what's written. Honestly, this is why I think Taylor's silence isn't about loyalty. It feels more like discomfort. Deep down, she may recognize that Blake's claims against Justin don't fully line up with what's actually in the record. When someone can joke on set about pushing boundaries with an adult coworker, but later reacts strongly to wardrobe comments like being called sexy, the double standard becomes impossible to ignore. That contrast is loud, and it changes how a lot of people are reading this entire situation. At the end of the day, the messages don't read like fear or confusion. They read like confidence, control, and calculated moves, and that's the part that's making so many people stop and rethink everything. That contrast hurts. It really does. Reading these messages makes your heart sink because the tone behind the scenes doesn't line up with the polished image we're shown publicly. And the wild part is this: these are only some of the texts. We still haven't seen the full exchanges, and what's already out there is heavy enough to leave a mark. I still want to see everything, every message, every thread, every detail, because if this is just a portion of it, there's clearly a lot more context waiting to surface. And now, I want to hear from you, because this story isn't landing the same way for everyone. How does all of this make you feel? Do you think Taylor's silence says more than any statement ever could? Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this conversation is far from over. If this breakdown helped you better understand what's really going on behind the scenes, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who's been following this story, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. And don't forget to hit the bell so you're always locked in when a new video drops. Thanks for watching CelebRush, and I'll see you in the next one.